Cyclone Belal nearing possible Réunion landfall on tonight's tropical weather bulletin. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical weather bulletin for January 15th. And it's going to be a memorable day for many on the Mascarene Islands, as we have Cyclone Belal poised to make a potential landfall on the island of Réunion, or at least a very close pass later today, as a Category 2 storm right now, with estimated winds of 105 miles per hour. It's 137 days until Atlantic hurricane season begins, and there's a big long frontal system moving through Florida and along the eastern seaboard of the United States, and a non-tropical low near the Azores. But no tropical areas of interest as you would expect to find. In the eastern Pacific, it's 120 days until hurricane season starts, and there really isn't very much to look at here. In the very low latitude tropical zone there's a few little thunderstorms, but they're quite neatly confined to a very small space there along that line. In the western Pacific, a little bit more wild, but still nothing really to look at in terms of tropical activity. There is quite a lot of thunderstorms though along the coast of Malaysia on the island of Borneo. And in the Indian Ocean there wasn't very much, but in the southern hemisphere, the Australian region, we're still looking at these two potential systems. 70% for a 40 mile per hour system now inland over the top end of Australia. 50% now over the Coral Sea, and 80% still for the other area out to sea, which looks like it will develop into a tropical cyclone at some point soon. Cyclone Belal, of course, is the main feature, and it's still strengthening just slightly, but it looks like it may be near its peak right now. Category 2 status, and here is a close-up of it right now. Of course, a cyclone warning is in effect for Réunion. It is 126 kilometres from St Paul, 130 from Saint Denis, 180 from St Joseph, 319 from Port Louis, Mauritius, and 342 from Myborg on the southeastern part of the island. Class 1 warnings remain in effect for Mauritius until just after 4 AM at least. I don't know what's happening with the warnings after that. I did hear rumours that they were cancelling warnings for some reason. I would advise strongly against that, because strong tropical storm force winds are expected even on Mauritius. But of course the strongest winds will be felt on La Réunion, where they will reach and possibly exceed 100 miles per hour, that's 160 kilometers per hour, particularly in areas further north and east. Looking at the latest satellite imagery, you can see this big bulk of convection, still dealing with a little bit of wind shear there on that western side especially, but it's certainly going to deliver a lot of rainfall as well as strong winds all over the island of Réunion, where we could see totals reaching 600 millimeters of rainfall. Winds are probably already getting up on the island now. As you can see, the storm is getting much closer. It's still not moving particularly quickly. I think it was something like 7 or 8 kilometers per hour right now, really moving slowly, although maybe later indications there are showing that perhaps it's just starting to speed up a little bit more. Radar from Mauritius looks like this. You can see the edge of the storm starting to appear. I did look at the Réunion radar, and that's on the front cover of tonight's stream, and it's looking pretty good on there as well, although a pretty large eye, and the far side of the storm may be not very well organized. Here's the other system, that's 98S I believe, the one in the eastern Indian Ocean near the Cocos Keeling Islands. You can see the land there on the right hand side. Heavily wind sheared, as you can clearly see there, but convection blowing up, and I think it could become a tropical cyclone fairly soon with some rotation. I don't think there's quite enough rotation for the Australian system, even though winds over the Joseph Bonaparte Gulf are now up to 40 miles per hour. It is still blowing up some substantial convection, but there is very little on the south and southeastern sides, obviously mainly due to that land interaction. Radar showing maybe a little bit more rotation actually, but it's still some distance away from being nameable as a tropical cyclone. Eastern Pacific still has one or two warm areas, up to 28 to 29 degrees Celsius. In general, though, the basin is quiet. Even parts of Cuba are now losing 26 degrees Celsius isotherms there in the Atlantic, and the cooling will continue probably for another month or so. In the Western Pacific, those temperatures through the Philippine Islands are cooling quite a bit as well. Out in the open ocean, though, temperatures still up to around 28 to 30 degrees Celsius at points, especially around Palau. Bay of Bengal still a little bit cooler there, and the Arabian Sea shoveled off to the eastern side of the basin there. Very warm sea surface temperatures near the Maldives, around 31 degrees Celsius. Where Belal is right now, those temperatures are around 28 degrees Celsius, and that will continue until it passes through the islands. And after that, if it does move further easterly, then those temperatures will be lasting a little bit longer for it. If it turns more southerly, it will weaken more. The Australian region showing some very warm sea surface temperatures off Western Australia and the Northern Territory, and also in the Gulf of Carpentaria, well above 30 degrees Celsius in a few locations. Also the case in the low latitudes of the South Pacific, with temperatures also around 28 to 29 degrees on the far side of New Caledonia now, as well as around Fiji. And this is the anomalies. Belal has been taking advantage of anomalies that are around 2 to 3 degrees above average, but they're starting to get closer to normal. A big area east of the Mascarene Islands, which is well above average. Western Pacific in general is a little bit above average too. The El Nino effect still prominent in the Eastern Pacific for now. Of course, rumours are that it is going to leave once again soon, and we could be in La Nina or neutral later on this year. In the South Pacific, we're still looking at quite a lot of oceanic heat content there, including the Coral Sea, heading down almost towards the Brisbane area. And in the Northern Pacific, you can see, I think it's actually built up a little bit more there near Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands. Quite a bit of oceanic heat content still residing in that area. Eastern Pacific is pretty much defeated for the time being, at least, as well. So the GFS takes, of course, Belal through La Réunion. Landfall expected probably at around lunchtime. That hasn't changed since our live stream earlier on, around noon or 1 p.m. And it will probably take a good couple of hours to traverse the island if it does make landfall, or failing a landfall, making a close pass. Then it moves eastwards. Mauritius gets strong tropical storm force winds as well. Rodrigues may get brief tropical storm force winds, and it stalls there towards day 4 and day 5, and then starts to dip southwards again at the end of that forecast period. Looking at the Australian region, there are two cyclones, one either side of the image. On the left hand side, of course, we have this mature tropical cyclone that forms. GFS is now more committed on a southeasterly movement rather than southwest, as it earlier said. And the other system over Australia, still unknown whether it will get to tropical storm status or not, but it will be delivering strong winds and a lot of rainfall for that whole area around there south of Darwin. So quite a lot to look at there. Coral Sea, we're also watching out for that other system potentially, and it looks like it's more likely that it will form in the Coral Sea now. Certainly doesn't look like anything will be in the Gulf. So there it is eventually near the end of that loop, the 19th of January, becoming a tropical storm probably by the end of that Imagery, just about getting its centre closed, and it hangs around up there in those higher reaches and then starts to descend southwards a little bit more. Looking at rainfall expectations then, they are still piled high for Réunion, and that will obviously mean a substantial issue regarding flooding and landslides. For Mauritius though, it looks like they will dodge a lot of that rain unless the track shifts northwards, which of course is really running out of time for that. 17 inches expected for La Réunion, which is over 400 millimeters. 3 inches only for Mauritius and 2 inches on Rodrigues, that's less than 100 millimeters. In northern Madagascar as well, we're looking at even higher amounts of rain, over 500 millimeters in a few spots, due to extremely heavy rainfall from, I think, a monsoonal pattern up there. And thankfully, where Belal is stalling later on, there's a hell of a lot of rain in there too, but it's not over any land areas. In the Australian region as well, looking at 2 banks of heavy rainfall occurring from those 2 tropical disturbances. The one on the left hand side near the Northern Territory and the border between Western Australia as well. Some very high amounts of rain inland, and also near the top of the Cape York Peninsula, probably near Waipa, we could be looking at very high amounts of rainfall there as well. So further west, first of all, we're looking at possibly up to 23 inches of rain. That's nearly 600 millimeters, and possibly around maybe 200 millimeters in Darwin. And on the Cape York Peninsula, Queensland, we could be looking at 550 to 600 millimeters there as well, and even higher amounts over the Coral Sea just off to the east. So another very wet scenario over the next few days, as if we haven't seen enough of that already so far this season. So the medium range, of course, has been a massive debate on whether Belal turns back, but the GFS is now a little bit more on board again with the idea that it will continue southeastwards in the end after stalling for a bit. We were looking for a time as though the storm may have been stalling around the general area for weeks even, but it looks like, hopefully, fingers crossed, the storm will be out of the picture by the time we get to around the 22nd, 23rd of January, so that's less than 10 days away. In the Coral Sea, we're looking again at this tropical cyclone, which has a very broad structure about it and starts to affect New Caledonia. It gets too big for itself, I think, and weakens, and actually this one is stalling around and up to no good as well. That one stalls in place for quite a few days, loses some of its energy as a result, and some of that oceanic heat content, I would imagine, and weakens briefly maybe to a tropical depression before coming back again as it moves slightly northwards. Interesting. You can take a look at the Force 13 merch store by scanning the barcode, and that will take you through to it, as when you can take a look at our full season and individual storm animations, as well as the rest of our lines and our Still Waiting for Hone t-shirts, available right now. Well then, in the Scilly range, we're still looking at that area, and guess what happens? Oh yes, it's a homing missile towards the coast of Australia, and there is a borderline hurricane equivalent landfall. And I think that's north of Hervey Bay, if I've got my geography correct. I may be wrong on that because it's been a good 3 weeks since I covered Australia, but there it is, moving inland, just not too far north of Brisbane, but they don't get tropical storm force winds there, not quite, and then moves inland, and still with some strong winds inland actually for quite a while after that landfall. But that is super long range, don't believe it yet. On this day in 1995, it wasn't where you would expect to see a tropical cyclone, but my gosh, it was when you look at that imagery. Cyclone 1M, a Medicane, reaching Category 1 hurricane equivalent status as it turned around near the coast of Greece and then turned southwards to cross the whole of the Mediterranean there towards Africa, where it eventually died off. What imagery that is, though, fantastic. Nonetheless, bad Medicane. Belal sparks the code red, and very serious situation. We'll have live coverage later. Alberto is the first name on the Atlantic naming list this year. In the Eastern Pacific it's a letter, and in the Central Pacific we're still waiting for Hone. In the Western Pacific our next name now is Iwinya, and in the North Indian Ocean it will be Remal. Only one storm so far this year, that's Belal. Of course we had Alvaro earlier on as well, but it formed just before New Year, so that counts towards last year. In the Australian region the next name is Kirrily, in the Southwest Indian Ocean Candice, and in the South Pacific it's Nat. That's all from tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. We'll be back again tomorrow night.